object is still in the exact same transform, but now it has a different mesh. Those 5 meshes you can use for great prototyping purposes. We'll use those: the sphere, the capsule, the cylinder, the cube, and what was the 5th one? There's going to be a plane. Those are going to be able to make a lot of good sample things in our Unity. But when we actually want to make more interesting stuff, we either have to have another tool to make a mesh, or download them from somebody else who has had another tool to make a mesh for us. If we want to make a torus, or if we want to make a robot, or if we want to make other things like that, we are going to have to find someone who has spent the time in a 3D modeling tool to make this kind of object for us with all the vertices. And that's somebody's usual full-time job at a game development company, is to make meshes, is to make 3D models of what you want. Somebody else uses them and adds a skeleton underneath so that you can manipulate them and smooth them out and move things around. But this is what the game developers and game designers do. They pull them in, put them in the world, and then make them do things. Okay, so we've got our transform. We get a mesh. There's a collider, which we'll talk about later, and a renderer. We'll get to that later. But it's enough to know that we know where it is and sort of what it looks like. Okay. Zoom back out here. These objects that we're adding, notice where they show up. They show up in the hierarchy. This is like I was saying, I think earlier, that we don't write a program to say, this is my main activity, this is my main method that creates a bunch of objects. That is happening now as we drag them into our scene. Programming stuff is going to show up in a week or two, where we actually start to learn C# code and write scripts to move things around. Now we're just seeing how these objects get thrown in there. It's called a hierarchy. There's no hierarchy right now, but we could make things into a hierarchy by saying this sphere is really a child of the cube. Now, wherever the cube goes, the sphere goes too. So I can move it around, and you can either pick one of these 3 dimensions individually if you're just moving it with your mouse, up and down, left and right, or you can pick a plane in here, the red plane, the blue plane, the green plane, to move your object in 2 dimensions at a time. So I could select in here, and I can move it in these 2 dimensions, keeping the red dimension normal constant. Or I could pick it here, and I can move it keeping the blue dimension constant and rotating the other 2. So this is how we manipulate our objects and move things around. But by picking the cube and having the sphere be a child of the cube, everything I do to the cube also happens to my sphere, which actually is a capsule. So we can change the names of things over here however we want them to be. I could call this building A. Help you organize so you don't just have cube, 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 and you have no idea what's going on. You can come up with whatever names you want, and when we program, those names are going to be accessible to us, so we can go find objects that have certain names in our scene and react to them and move with them. Okay, so let's notice what's happening here. Building A has a transform of 0.7, 0.98, 0.06. Capsule has a transform with these particular numbers. If I zero them out, it doesn't go to 0, 0, 0 in the global scene. We have global 3D coordinates of where we are in this big world. But as soon as you make something a child of something else, it resets its transform to be a local transform on its parent. This is really convenient and helpful for us, because we could say, I want there to be a cube here, and I want this capsule to be in the y dimension 4 above it. So there it is. It's exactly at the same x and z coordinate, but it is 4 above, or 2 above, or 3 above. So convenient to have our transforms become localized transforms and positions of our parents. So we create our hierarchy however we want them to be, and things get manipulated. And still, again, I can move around my building, and my capsule comes with me. Okay. Sometimes this is good to be able to say this capsule is part of this building, but Unity really lets us come up with an abstract way of talking about a collection of these objects by making us empty game objects, just called game object. And the better thing to do is to start creating a hierarchy underneath some unnamed game object that doesn't have a mesh, that doesn't really have much to it. There's no components to that object. All it is a container for some other thing. Because your building might have a first floor, it might have a second floor, it might have a capsule sticking off it, and they're now all part of game object. This is what we want to say building A, and this is probably what we want to call like floor 1. Let's call this like escape pod 2. Those kind of things are going to be coming into how you organize your objects. You don't want to just have everything lying there in the hierarchy by themselves. It's called hierarchy for a reason. It really helps you out when you're trying to move your objects around. Okay, what else can we do with this? I want to make more of these, so I can copy and paste, and now I have another building A with another floor under it, an escape pod. Let's move this one slightly. 1, 2. We now have 2 of those exact same things. This is how we're going to be setting up scenes, making things happen. Any questions so far? It's a nice tool for throwing a lot of 3D objects into a world. Okay. Another thing, these at the top left-hand corner, these different toolbars, there's shortcuts in Unity to get to them with Q, W, E, R, and T. Q, W, E, R, and T. So if you're using your keys and you don't want to keep on clicking back up here, but you're like, oh, I have this object, I want to rotate it, I can do that. Oh, I want to move it, I can do that. Just with a couple keys, keep myself in the scene as much as possible. Now I want to pan things around. Let's fly through. Oh, I want to be over here. Here we go. Those kind of manipulations are possible with your keyboard shortcuts. Okay, those are objects we can throw in. There was an object in there initially, the camera. Let's see what the camera is doing for us. The camera is the way that we take this three-dimensional world and visualize it in the game. Or we let's say this is what the person who plays the game is going to see. We have to add in cameras. We get a camera preview here, and when we actually press play, this is what shows up in our game that we want to see. These are the objects in our world from this particular perspective, from this camera looking in this direction. That is what the camera sees. Cameras are game objects themselves. They can be moved. They can be rotated. Whatever we want to do with a game object, We can do that with our cameras. Put that back the way it was. There we go. And it has a transform, just like any other object, X, Y's, and Z's in the position, rotation, and scale. That camera can do pretty much whatever it wants. The special things about a camera, this is one of the big ones, the camera component. Background color. Right now it's blue. We can pick that to be whatever color we want. I want it to be sort of a red. That's now my background color for this camera. Essentially every frame that it's going to be doing, it clears the screen, wipes it to red, and then says, do some ray tracing, figure out what objects are out there, how do I display them to the user? How do I make them show up with my perspective? Okay, there is a culling mask. We'll talk about layers later, but you could have a camera that only sees certain things. Depending on what layer that object is, well, let's go ahead and do that. You could pick a layer for a particular object. Yes, change the children. And then I could make my camera only see things of a certain layer. One way to make a camera show up and show you like an overhead view of where you are in the scene. One way to make a camera show you only certain things. If you have a light on, if you have a certain ability, different pieces can show up in different cameras. We'll talk about cameras next week a bit more, but these are the basics. How do I want to see my world? Either in perspective view or in orthographic view. Basically, do I want to see a 2D or a 3D version from this camera? Orthographic, the scene starts to look a little bit different. It's just straight. There is no perspective. Perspective gives us what we would expect from a 3D model. Okay, field of view. Just like with an actual camera, you can make it narrow in its field of view. You can make it wide. That's your choice of how wide your angle is on your camera. Do you have a wide angle lens or do you have a really focused lens? That's up to you. Clipping planes are talking about if things get too close to the camera, the near spot says if they get within 0.3 of the camera, they will disappear. If it gets within 1,000 of the camera, it's too far away, it will disappear. There's no point in rendering things that are too far away. You can't see them, they're just pixels. So you can change that to be like 10. And so it will clip and cut off some of these objects. It only shows a couple of them. If we make it 15, we can see more of those objects. We make it 20, we could probably see all of those objects. We can see how far the camera goes and what will be captured as we use those. And again, if things are too close, there's no point in showing it because there won't be anything else to show. So it's as if you just ignore things that get too close to your camera. Clipping plane, I think you visualize that. You could say, yep, it starts to show up there. This is your box of what the camera can see. Anything inside this box. Near clipping plane, far clipping plane. 3 and 1,000 is usually what it comes with when it starts. Those are the important pieces for your camera. Any questions about the camera? Okay, one more essential thing to really make things work. If we look at our game again, it looks pretty bad. Number one, because I picked a horrible color. Let's pick a brighter one, light blue. But number two, oh, it's gone. Okay, aha. This happens all the time. When you play and want to watch your game,